So, picture a specific moment on a dirt-packed battlefield. A soldier is huddled in a collapsed trench.
Right, the artillery fire stops for just a second.
Yeah, and they drop their weapon, raising their hands. Or, imagine a civilian, someone just trying to get groceries in an occupied town, walking down a shattered street, and they're suddenly stopped at a military checkpoint.
Just a normal day turned upside down.
Exactly. Precisely. In that fraction of a second, an individual crosses an invisible line. They go from being a combatant or a free citizen to being a captive.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It is, and here is the core tension we're looking at today. In that precise moment of capture, is that person a legally protected individual with guaranteed rights, or are they instantly converted into geopolitical currency?
Like a bargaining chip in a massive high-stakes negotiation.
Yeah, a liquid asset. Welcome to Reformed Thinking, where we take a deep dive into the underlying mechanics of our world. Today, our mission is to examine the harsh realities of captivity, prisoner exchanges, and international law in the Ukraine-Russia war.
It's a heavy topic, for sure.
It really is. We are going to look at this crisis through a dual lens. First, the legal frameworks designed to govern warfare, and second, the theological realism that helps us make sense of human behavior when those frameworks, completely collapse.
Which they frequently do.
Right. But before we get into the mechanics of these laws and that theological realism, I need to state clearly to you, our listener, that the source texts we are analyzing contain highly politically charged realities.
Extremely charged. We're talking about the actions of sovereign nations in a live conflict.
Yes, so we are not taking any sides or endorsing the viewpoints of the original texts. Instead, we are impartially reporting the factual content provided in the source material, so you can clearly understand the arguments being made and the data being presented.
That is a critical distinction to establish right at the start. We are looking at the facts and the frameworks through which those facts are interpreted by the analysts and monitors on the ground.
So to understand how these international laws break down in practice, I feel like we first have to establish what those laws are actually supposed to guarantee mechanically.
Yeah, the baseline. The international community relies heavily on the Geneva framework. The primary function of this framework is to categorize people in a conflict zone so they can be protected.
Categorize them how?
Well, the rules strictly distinguish between military captives and civilian non-combatants. So, in an international armed conflict like the Ukraine-Russia war, the Third Geneva Convention governs prisoners of war, or POWs.
Okay, the Third Geneva Convention.
Right. And the underlying premise here is that a POW is not a criminal for having fought. Their detention is not a punishment.
It's just a security measure.
Yeah, strictly a security measure designed to keep them off the battlefield until hostilities conclude.
I want to stop right there and look at that concept because, international law often sounds less like a physical structural shield and more like a fiat currency.
A fiat currency, that's an interesting way to put it.
Well, yeah, because it only has value as long as everyone collectively agrees to believe in it. The moment the entity holding the gun stops believing in the paper, it becomes worthless.
Oh, absolutely.
But on paper, what does this fiat currency actually promise the soldier who surrenders?
On paper, the promises are highly specific, very robust. Article 13 of the Third Geneva Convention states that POWs must be humanely treated at all times, protecting them against any act of violence or intimidation.
Okay, humane treatment, that's Article 13.
Right. Then you have Article 17, which strictly forbids coercive interrogation.
Wait, really? No coercion at all?
None. You cannot use physical or psychological pressure to extract intelligence from a captured combatant. They are only required to give their name, rank, and serial number.
Just the absolute basics.
Yeah. Furthermore, Article 118 mandates that POWs must be released and repatriated without delay after the cessation of active hostilities. That is the theoretical shield for the soldier.
But there's also the Fourth Geneva Convention, right?
Yes, which establishes separate, distinct protections for civilians. Article 34 explicitly forbids hostage-taking under any circumstances.
Or all hostages.
And Article 49 forbids forcible transfers or deportations of civilians from an occupied territory to the territory of the occupying nation.
Okay, but wait. If Article 17 explicitly forbids coercive interrogation, how does a nuclear superpower justify breaking it mechanically?
Well,
do they openly deny it's happening, or do they use some kind of legal loophole to reclassify the prisoners? I'm trying to understand how a nation signs a document saying they won't torture people for information, and then the source material describes situations where correct classification goes entirely out the window.
It's usually a combination.
Yeah.
They utilize outright denial, obstruction of independent oversight, and intentional misclassification.
Obstruction of oversight, meaning keeping people out.
Yeah. Correctly classifying someone as a POW or a civilian is not some bureaucratic luxury. It's not a matter of keeping the filing cabinets organized.
No, it's life or death.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. That classification dictates a person's right to life, their right to basic medical care, and their right to be visited by independent monitors.
Like the Red Cross.
Right, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC. They have a mandate to visit these detention facilities to ensure basic transparency and verify that the conditions meet Geneva standards.
So mechanically, the way a belligerent nation bypasses the rules is by obstructing that access.
Yes. The Russian Federation, for example, has systematically restricted or outright denied the ICRC access to key detention facilities.
He's shutting the doors.
Yeah, the Olnivka prison is a prime example of this deliberate obstruction. When you deny access to independent monitors, you isolate the captives entirely.
So the fiat currency doesn't just lose its value. The market where it trades is shut down entirely.
Right, because there are no witnesses.
And the moment the witnesses are removed, the descent into brutality seems almost instantaneous.
It's incredibly fast.
Yeah, when that oversight is dismantled, we move from the theoretical protections of Geneva to the grim reality documented on the ground. The statistics provided by the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine are just staggering.
They really are hard to read.
They reported that 96 to 97% of Ukrainian POWs in Russian custody gave accounts of systematic torture, starvation, and psychological terror.
96 to 97%.
Let that number sink in for a second,
Yeah.
We aren't talking about a few isolated incidents or a handful of guards acting out of line. That is a statistical near certainty.
It's the norm, not the exception.
And we're also looking at direct battlefield violations before anyone even reaches a camp. The sources detail an incident in April 2026 where 4 unarmed Ukrainian soldiers were executed near Veteranarn right after surrendering.
Before they were even processed.
Right. My question is, how does such widespread brutality happen systematically? How does a normal human being, someone who is maybe a baker or an accountant before the war, participate in a 97% torture rate?
That's the real question.
Is this a breakdown in military discipline, or is this the intended feature of the system?
Based on the analysis, it's entirely systemic. It functions as an intended feature of the interrogation apparatus.
Wow.
Yeah. And to understand the psychology behind it, we have to look through the theological framework provided in our source material. The sources point us to Chapter 6 of the Westminster Confession, which deals with the concept of total depravity.
Total depravity. Let's break that down for the listener.
Sure. In Reformed theology, total depravity does not mean that every single person is always acting as wickedly as they possibly can at every moment.
Right. It doesn't mean everyone is a cartoon villain.
No, it means that every aspect of the human condition, the mind, the will, the emotions, is touched and corrupted by sin.
So the capacity is always there.
Yes. The brutality we see in these camps is not an anomaly of human nature. It is a manifestation of it when the external constraints are removed.
The constraints being oversight, laws, witnesses.
Right. It is an institutionalized method of crushing wills, dominating the defenseless, and extracting intelligence. The theological reality is that without divine restraint, or without immediate, severe earthly consequences.
Like a functioning justice system.
Exactly. Without that, the human heart's capacity for cruelty is boundless. A theater of war simply removes the normal societal restraints, revealing what is already lying dormant underneath.
Yeah, and that is a heavy realization for anyone listening. We live in an era that heavily champions a progressivist view of human nature.
We do. We assume things are always getting better.
Yeah, the general consensus in modern society is that humanity is inherently good, that we are evolving morally, and that education and international agreements are sufficient to secure peace and humane behavior.
Just sign the right treaty and everyone will behave.
Right. If you just put the right rules on a piece of paper, people will follow them.
Yes.
But when you look at a place like the Geneva prison, or you read the accounts of what happens in those interrogation rooms, that modern, optimistic view of human nature shatters completely.
It falls apart entirely.
You cannot look at a 97% torture rate and conclude that humanity is naturally trending toward moral goodness.
You cannot. And that realization forces us to confront why certain practices continue even when the laws of humane treatment are completely ignored.
What do you mean?
Well, the progressivist view assumes that cruelty is a lack of education or a misunderstanding. But the realist theological view understands that cruelty can be a highly efficient, calculated tool.
A tool for extraction.
Yes. The system in these detention centers is designed to break a human being down to their absolute lowest psychological state. It is a process of systematic dehumanization.
Stripping away everything that makes them who they are.
Right. So by the time a captive is considered for release, their physical and psychological state is often severely degraded. And this brings up a massive contradiction in the conflict.
Which is?
The two sides are locked in a brutal war, they're violating the treaties meant to govern captivity, yet they consistently agree to trade people back and forth across a live, heavily fortified front line.
Yeah, that is wild to think about. If the system is designed to crush wills and extract intelligence, why let these captives go at all?
It seems counterintuitive.
What is the mechanical incentive for Moscow, or Kyiv for that matter, to release a soldier they have been interrogating? That brings us to the actual numbers of these swaps, which are massive.
Well, we're not talking about 2 or 3 people at a time.
No, we're looking at a 1,000 for 1,000 exchange in May 2025. Then there was a 500 for 500 swap brokered by Switzerland in March 2026.
And another big one right after that.
Yeah, shortly after that, in April 2026, the United Arab Emirates brokered a 386-person swap. When I look at these massive lists of human beings being traded, I'm trying to figure out the logistics and the motive.
It's incredibly complex.
How do you physically trade 1,000 people across a mine frontline? And more importantly, are these swaps genuinely humanitarian efforts to save lives? Or are these nations just restocking their depleted armies?
Well, regarding the logistics, they are incredibly delicate. They require temporary localized ceasefires, secure back channels of communication, and often a neutral physical location.
Like a border crossing.
Yeah, sometimes right on the border or in the third-party country where buses of captives are exchanged under strict observation.
Okay, so that's how it happens physically. But what about the motive?
As for the motive, it is a combination of both humanitarian relief and cold tactical calculation. And it's driven by very distinct incentives on each side.
Let's break those down. What's Kyiv's incentive?
For Kyiv, operating within a democratic system means there is massive domestic pressure. The families of captured soldiers demand answers, they organize protests, and they push the government relentlessly to bring their people home.
Because they answer to the voters.
Right. A successful swap is a political necessity for the leadership to maintain public morale.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about Moscow? They don't have that same democratic pressure.
No, for Moscow, the incentives are different. Swaps appease certain hawkish military and nationalist factions within the country who demand the return of specific units.
Keeping the military factions happy.
Yes. And they allow the military to recover highly trained specialists, pilots, intelligence officers, seasoned commanders.
People who take years to train.
Exactly. But there is a shared incentive that answers your question about restocking armies. By 2025 and 2026, both sides face massive personnel attrition.
They're just running out of guys.
Yeah. Experienced, battle-tested veterans are highly valuable assets. Returning them to the front lines, once they have recovered, is a tactical priority.
I'm struck by the stark reduction of the individual here. The human being is stripped of their individual dignity and evaluated strictly on their utility to the state.
It's very utilitarian.
They are a pilot, they are a sniper, they are a political win for a democratic leader. Their value is assigned by the state apparatus.
Yes. And the theological implication here is devastating. We are talking about the imago Dei, the belief that humanity is created in the image of God.
Right, possessing inherent, irreducible worth simply by existing.
Exactly. When you analyze these massive exchanges, the imago Dei is reduced to a liquid asset. People are placed in a transactional crucible.
Their value is no longer inherent.
No, it is entirely dependent on what they can fetch in a sovereign negotiation. They become quantitative elements on a spreadsheet.
Like trading cards, almost.
Sadly, yes. A sniper might be worth 5 regular infantrymen, an officer might be worth 20. The state assumes the role of determining the exchange rate for human life.
That is dark. And if Ukraine trades 100 captured Russian soldiers for 100 kidnapped Ukrainian civilians, what does that signal to the Russian military about the value of sweeping up non-combatants?
It signals that civilians are highly valuable inventory.
The discussion takes an even darker turn when we look at the most vulnerable group caught up in this market, the civilians. The sources outline that the massive May 2025 exchange, the 1,000 for 1,000 swap, actually included 120 civilians from each side.
Non-combatants swept up in a military trade.
Yeah. We are reading about the systematic exploitation of civilians through arbitrary detention. They are subjected to mock trials for fabricated charges like sabotage.
Flimsy excuses just to hold them.
And we even see forced conscription, where civilians and some POWs are forced into units like the Bohdan-Khmelnytsky Battalion to fight against their own country.
Which is a massive violation.
Right. Buying innocent civilians back seems to create a massive incentive to kidnap more of them.
It absolutely creates that incentive. What you were describing mechanically is the exact definition of hostage logic.
Hostage logic.
Yes. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, an occupying power can only intern civilians for imperative security reasons, and they must be released as soon as that specific immediate security threat passes.
They can't just throw them in a camp indefinitely.
No, they cannot be held indefinitely, and they certainly cannot be used as bargaining chips.
Hmm.
But what happens in reality is the creation of a hostage pool.
A hostage pool.
By detaining thousands of civilians arbitrarily, pulling them off the street or out of their homes, and handing down lengthy, fabricated prison sentences through sham courts, the occupying authority creates massive artificial leverage.
Artificial leverage. So they're creating a problem so they can trade the solution.
Yes. They force the opposing side to trade highly valuable military assets, train soldiers, specialists, officers, just to secure the release of innocent non-combatants.
Which entirely breaks the Fourth Geneva Convention.
It entirely breaks it, and it weaponizes the most vulnerable population in the conflict zone.
Let me make sure I have the mechanics of this hostage pool correct. If I am an occupying force and I know the democratic nation I am fighting has immense political pressure from its citizens to bring people home.
Right, because of those protests we mentioned.
Yeah, then I do not even need to capture soldiers on the battlefield. I can just arrest 100 local teachers, mechanics, and farmers in the territory I control.
Anyone you can grab.
Right. Accuse them of espionage, and then tell the opposing government, give me back my captured fighter pilots and I will give you back your teachers.
That is the exact mechanism. The occupying force manufactures a crisis and then sells the solution back to the victim's government.
It's basically extortion at a national scale.
It's a highly effective, deeply cynical strategy that turns the opposing nation's moral obligations against them. And it requires a vast orchestrated system of detention to maintain that inventory of hostages.
Because you need somewhere to put them all.
Yes. Furthermore, when you look at the forced conscription into units like the Bohdan-Khmelnytsky Battalion, you see an even more extreme violation.
Right, forcing them to fight.
Not only are they detaining the protected class, but they are forcing them to take up arms against their own sovereign nation.
Which has to be a war crime.
It is a grave breach of international law designed to prevent the literal enslavement of conquered populations for military labor.
I want to look at how these massive trades actually get executed, because two nations locked in total war are not just calling each other on the phone to hash out a spreadsheet of 1,000 names.
No, they need intermediaries.
We mentioned the heavy involvement of the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Switzerland. If the United Nations is failing to enforce the rules and these individual mediators are stepping up to broker the deals, how do these brokers operate?
It's a very delicate dance.
Are they utilizing secure back channels? And, what is the commission for a nation brokering a high-stakes trade across a mined front line? Are they doing this out of pure charity?
They're utilizing a combination of intelligence back channels, diplomatic envoys, and secure financial and communication networks that bypass the immediate conflict zone.
So it's all happening behind closed doors.
Very much so.
Okay.
As for the Commission, it is geopolitical leverage. Facilitating these highly visible, emotionally charged swaps elevates the mediating nation's global standing.
It makes them look good.
It proves their diplomatic utility to the international community. More critically, it allows them to preserve essential diplomatic and economic channels with both the Western coalition and Moscow.
So they get to play both sides.
Right. For a country like the UAE or Turkey, maintaining a position as an indispensable mediator means they can continue to conduct trade, secure energy deals, and balance their own regional security interests.
Without making anyone too mad.
Yeah. Without being entirely alienated by either side of the broader geopolitical divide.
That makes total sense.
While the release of captives provides undeniable relief to the individuals and their families, we have to recognize that the mediation itself is frequently utilized as a tool of foreign policy.
It's transactional for the brokers, too.
Yes, it is a strategic positioning move rather than a purely humanitarian intervention.
They are acting as the escrow agents in a global transaction, and the fee they collect is diplomatic immunity and relevance.
That's a great way to put it. Escrow agents.
Which prompts the ultimate question hanging over this entire situation. We have international laws on the books. We have global governing bodies like the United Nations. Why isn't anyone stopping the underlying crimes?
The million-dollar question.
How does a UN veto actually block humanitarian intervention on the ground? Our sources point directly at the structural design of the United Nations Security Council.
Specifically, the veto authority.
Right, the veto held by its permanent members.
To understand how the veto blocks action on the ground mechanically, you have to look at the structure of the UN Security Council. The Council has 5 permanent members, and each possesses an absolute veto over any substantive resolution.
An absolute veto, meaning just one no vote kills the whole thing.
Yes. If a resolution is proposed to send armed peacekeepers to a region to enforce mandatory inspections of detention facilities like Olenivka, or to impose crippling universal economic sanctions to force compliance with the Geneva Conventions,
Right.
a single permanent member can vote no, and the resolution is dead. It never leaves the room. When one of those permanent members is a belligerent in the war, you have a structural paradox. You essentially have a police force where the chief suspect has the constitutional authority to veto their own investigation.
So if a global governing body has the rules written down, but it entirely lacks the authority or the structural ability to enforce those rules against a permanent member, I mean, international laws are just suggestions.
They are.
They are the fiat currency we talked about earlier, but the central bank has collapsed.
From a structural standpoint, they are rendered virtually powerless against a nuclear-armed permanent member. And this connects deeply to Augustinian Calvinist realism.
Okay, tell me more about that.
This realism is reflected in Chapter 23 of the Westminster Confession. That chapter discusses the civil magistrate's mandate. The magistrate is ordained to bear the sword, to maintain order, and to execute justice against wrongdoers.
So there's supposed to be an earthly authority keeping order.
Right. But that entire concept assumes there is a sword to bear and a sovereign authority capable of swinging it.
And globally, there isn't one.
No. When a sovereign nation operates in the international arena, it frequently operates in a vacuum with no higher earthly accountability.
There's no world police.
There is no supreme global executive with the authority to arrest a head of state or physically compel a nuclear power to open its prison doors.
So what happens to the laws?
Without that enforcement mechanism, covenants and treaties become fragile parchment barriers. The only actual restraint functioning in this conflict right now is raw reciprocity.
I want to make sure I understand the mechanics of reciprocity in this context, meaning the only reason a military commander decides to treat a captured enemy soldier well is not because they read the Geneva Conventions,
No, not at all.
but because they are terrified that if they execute their prisoner, the enemy general across the field will order the execution of their own captured troops in retaliation.
Yes,
It is a terrifying standoff.
precisely. It is a primitive transactional restraint based entirely on fear, not a commitment to the rule of law.
Just raw.
It relies on the assumption that both sides possess enough of the other side's troops to make retaliation a credible threat.
Mutually assured destruction, but with prisoners.
Yes. And when that balance of captives is skewed, or when one side decides they no longer care about the fate of their own captured soldiers, even that primitive restraint vanishes and the atrocities escalate.
Let's bring all of this together for you, the listener. We have covered a vast amount of ground today.
We really have.
We looked at the illusion of the Geneva framework, which looks sturdy on paper but frequently dissolves without enforcement, acting more like a fiat currency that loses value when the actors stop believing in it.
A currency backed by nothing.
Right. We discussed the heartbreaking reality of human life being reduced to geopolitical currency in massive prisoner swaps where the imago Dei is quantified on a spreadsheet.
People treated as liquid assets.
Yeah. We examined the grim mechanics of hostage-taking, where civilians are swept up into a hostage pool to create artificial leverage against a democratic government.
The weaponization of innocent people.
And finally, we looked at the structural paralysis of the United Nations, where the veto authority ensures that international law remains a suggestion rather than a mandate.
As we close our analysis, the source text leaves us with a theological reflection that shifts our perspective entirely.
What does it point out?
When we look at the structural paralysis of human law and the failure of earthly magistrates to execute justice on a global scale, we're forced to recognize that earthly peace is frequently just a temporary armed truce.
Just waiting for the next spark.
Exactly. Human institutions, by their very design, are structurally incapable of delivering lasting justice in a fallen world, especially when dealing with the realities of total depravity unchecked by earthly consequence.
So where does that leave us?
This prompts a vital consideration for everyone listening. True justice must rely on a higher, eternal standard that supersedes any human transaction, treaty, or geopolitical market.
That is a thought that will linger long after this conversation ends. Thank you for joining us on this extensive deep dive. We appreciate you taking the time to grapple with these difficult realities alongside us. Until next time, keep thinking critically.